Today's episode of This Week in Startups is brought to you by Citrix GoToMeeting. Meeting is believing. Visit gotomeeting.com and use the promo code TWiST to begin your free 30-day trial. And by Walker Corporate Law, a boutique law firm specializing in the representation of entrepreneurs. Visit them at walkercorporatelaw.com. And by AWS Activate, the Amazon Web Services startup program. It's easy to start and scale your business with AWS. Visit aws.amazon.com/activate.
Hey everybody, welcome to This Week in Startups. Today on the program, Max Ventilla. He is a serial entrepreneur, and in his third company, he is going to try to reinvent education. His company is called the AltSchool. It's a school here in San Francisco at 4 locations, 150 students in its second year, and he has raised $40 million from some of the top investors in the world to apply technology to education and new processes. It's essentially the Uber or the Tesla of education. It's a fascinating hour-long discussion. And if you care about our children's future or your children's future and how they should be educated and how horrible our education was, this episode will make you cry about how bad your education was and how good it could have been. Stick with us. It's an amazing, inspiring, and depressing episode of This Week in Startups.
That's what it's all about, man. They said money is the root of all evil. What? Funny how it feeds my people. We ain't gonna live like equals until we get the money, spend the money, and defeat you. Yeah, money is the root of all evil. What? Funny how it feeds my people. Yeah, we ain't gonna live like equals until we get the money, spend the money, and defeat you.
Hey everybody, welcome to This Week in Startups. Today, an amazing episode where we're going to talk about education. Yes, education. Why should it be any different than transportation, commerce, shopping, food delivery, video games? Everything is being changed by technology. We know that. People use the word disruption. But really, there's a lot of innovation going on that either saves time, saves money, or just makes things more enjoyable or more effective. And today on the program, Max Ventilla, who is a serial entrepreneur, and he is the CEO and founder of AltSchool, is with us. And he's going to talk about basically reimagining education. Now, Max, you're a serial entrepreneur. You did Vark.com back in the day. Aardvark, right? Aardvark. Which was or Vark.com. It was a Q&A site back in the day. It was very innovative. Got bought by Google. I guess you did okay for yourself.
It was an amazing thing to have done that, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you guys got bought so quickly. What was it, like 2 or 3 years?
2.5 years.
2.5 years you get bought. So I'm assuming you did okay. Were you guys bought before it went public, Google, or it was after?
Oh, yeah.
After. Well after. And then you spent a couple of years there, I take it. Mm-hmm. And now you've started a school, which we had Gil Pincina on, who I guess helped fund AltSchool through his angel syndicate. What is the mission at AltSchool, and why are you choosing to do this?
So AltSchool's mission is to help all kids achieve their full potential. And thinking about the word all and the word full kind of forces you to think about scale, and it forces you to think about impact. And my career, and actually Aardvark was my second startup. I started an enterprise software company back in the Web 1 era.
Oh, what was that?
It was around knowledge management. It was kind of about finding through email attachments what work products were being generated in companies, and then finding ways to resurface that work product. And ended up selling that company and going back to the basics about what skills I wanted for the next time I did a startup, which was about a decade later. And then at Google, kind of again had the opportunity to step back and say, I want to do a startup again. What are the kind of skills I would want to acquire, whether it's around big data or building bigger engineering teams? And it's really been leading up to take this kind of an enormous challenge that is relevant for not just the world, but me personally. I have 2 small kids, a 3.5-year-old daughter and a 1 and some year old son. And really being able to make what I wanted to exist in the world for them, an elementary school that from first principles had been updated for the 21st century, that could build on the amazing things that you see in great classrooms and great schools today, but still kind of take that 21st century approach in terms of making something that's going to improve the more people participate in it and over time.
And so you took the venture capital route and the startup route as opposed to doing a nonprofit, right? So almost all schools operate as nonprofits. You decided this would be a business. Why did you make that choice?
So, having spent a lot of time at Google, I was at Google before I left to start Aardvark and then ended up back there for actually over 3 years. And that company, for me, has shown the enormous amount of impact that you can have through a mission-driven for-profit enterprise. And I think that you need to combine those two things. You need to take a very long-term view in terms of the impact you want to have and the business you want to create. And what's interesting is there are actually new structures that represent more of a hybrid now between a kind of for-profit enterprise
and a benefit corporation.
Right. So we're in the kind of final stages of converting to a benefit corporation.
Oh, you are?
Yeah. So that'll happen within probably weeks.
So explain to the audience what a benefit corporation is.
So a benefit corporation is a different classification of company. So you still have shareholders, you can still take investment, but it's different than, for example, a Delaware C Corp or an S Corp that you might otherwise be set up at. And the main consequence is, number one, by being a benefit corporation, you need to state that you are a benefit corporation, and you need to go through a regular exercise, which is at least annual, of assessing your performance according to your mission and according to kind of social impact measures that go beyond just financial performance, income statement, balance sheet, cash flow.
And who holds you accountable to these? Because this is a very new thing, and I've invested in one corporation, Hand Up, which is building software and systems to sort of help the homeless build profile pages, and they take donations. And they're like, hey, you could make a profit off of this. I don't really want to make a profit off of it, but they want it to be a benefit corporation to move quicker. And they said they have to live up to this mission. How the government gets involved, or the IRS, or who gets involved in saying you're developing, all students to their full potential? That's a broad, crazy mission, like you said earlier. Who decides if you're actually living up to that? You, the board, the government?
So there are two different kind of overseers in some sense. There is certainly the Delaware government, so you're set up as a Delaware PBC, and they have certain rules in terms of filings and things that you need to do.
Okay.
I'd say the more stringent oversight comes from this organization called B Labs, which which goes through and actually certifies you as a B Corp. And actually, there were B Corps as early as maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago. Initially, they were just certified by B Labs. There wasn't actually a different kind of corporate standing that they had.
So some private company came up with this concept, almost like a good housekeeping seal of approval.
That's right. And what you'll find is actually when you look through the kind of 200-point checklist for B Labs, that the majority of things are actually not directly related to your own mission. They're just generally related to good corporate practice, right?
Such as?
Having equal pay, relatively equal pay across, radically different levels of the organization, having internal transparency.
Okay. So the lowest paid person can... The highest paid person can't get paid more than 20x the lowest, or
that
something.
Kind of thing. And it's not like you need to have 200 points in order to be a B Corp, but you get points for different things that you do that generally, I think most people would agree, relate to better corporate rather than worse corporate.
It's almost practice. Being a better citizen or something.
Absolutely.
It's super clever.
It's very, very well done. And to your earlier question of why, one form versus another, it's really let us balance the kind of long-term desires of the mission with ultimately what is the very reasonable expectation for investors that they're going to get a positive return from that investment.
Yeah. So you started last year, I think.
June of last year.
Last year. June from a year ago.
2013.
June 2013. Right. So you got you did a full year. What was class like in year one?
So, over my career, I have become increasingly a process person rather than a product person. And my process is really user-driven design. And the idea that you learn by doing and that you cannot infer, especially if you're not an absolute expert in the domain, which I'm not. Right,
you're not a 20-year teacher. You weren't a principal or something.
No, you cannot infer what people really need without living it.
Right.
And without partnering with amazing educators, without serving actual parents and actual students. And in that process of doing it before you've really built an underlying platform to do it fundamentally differently, you inform what you should actually be creating. And we did that with Aardvark in the sense of literally kind of having human beings pretend to be Aardvark before we actually built the systems that would do the various functions that Aardvark ultimately did. And we did it here in terms of hiring unbelievable career child-centered educators and letting them in a mixed stage lower elementary and mixed stage upper elementary group kind of do their thing with a level of support and a student-teacher ratio that was totally unsustainable, right? With the intention that we could understand what were the ways in which we could create new processes or create supporting groups or ultimately create technologies that could let them do things that way and better, but in a scalable, sustainable way.
So using the venture investment, as it were, to create, giving them a child-teacher ratio that was just, like you say, unsustainable in terms of it wouldn't be a profitable enterprise in that year one, but you learned a heck of a lot. What did you learn in that first year? And what was the teachers' reaction? Because I would think teachers, God, there's so many great schools here in the Bay Area, they might be a little reticent to jump into a startup, or were they totally stoked to jump into a startup run by somebody who had no experience in education? I mean, this is like...
So let me start with the teacher question and then go back to the question of what we learned. So I'll share an astonishing statistics. We've received about 1,000 student applications to date.
1,000 student?
About 1,000 student applications. So we have about 150 students right now enrolled for this year. And we have a wait list of maybe 400, 500 students on top of that out of the 1,000 students that applied. We've had 3,000 teacher applications to date. So we've had 3 times more teacher applications than student applications.
So what do you attribute that to? Are people just, the teachers feel that the schools they're in are not progressive enough?
I wouldn't use the word progressive. What I would say is
Why not? It's a loaded word?
No, I think that
innovative?
There are plenty of schools that are fantastically progressive. There are plenty of schools that are extremely innovative.
Really?
There are lots of schools that are absolutely pushing the envelope.
Really? I would say the majority are not innovative.
Themselves.
They're basically holding on because they have tight budgets.
And they have to. I mean, I think that if you asked me what would be the kind of hardest thing for us to overcome at AltSchool, it would be having 1 million students right now.
Right.
If you gave us 1 million students right now, the only thing we could do would be to tread water. It is so inconceivable how an existing organization at that scale that has a certain
So you have
type
great
of DNA,
empathy for them.
Enormous. I mean, I just, and ultimately the kind of impact that we can have at AltSchool will come predominantly through developing approaches and tools in partnership with those kind of organizations. But from our perspective, we offer a level of discretion and a level of support, which is actually pretty opposite to almost every school out there. So
really? Explain.
Being able to say to a teaching team, you are going to personalize the education for this student in a classroom setting, but in a way that takes account of not just the level that they're at and what kind of sequencing of objectives makes sense, but what interests them, how they learn, how they're motivated today, what context they're in. You're going to have the discretion in the same way that even though you might have GPS, you're still going to have the discretion to kind of decide whether to follow it and where you're going to and exactly
take the more scenic route if you want to.
Take whatever else, stop for lunch right now, et cetera. You're going to have that level of discretion, but you're also going to have a tremendous amount of support. One of the things that we almost have to re-educate teachers around is to complain. Tell us when they're wasting their time. Tell us when they are using a tool that stinks, because we are literally going to rebuild that tool for them. We have more engineers than like the LA Unified School District. You know,
wow.
And again, I'm not talking about like sysadmin folks. I'm not talking about people that like
you're talking about product people, people who build like Vark or Quora or Twitter.
Exactly.
These are like software developers. All right,
folks that can develop from scratch. So that level of support with that level of discretion is what is attracting those people from the best places, not just in the Bay Area, but nationwide.
All right, when we get back from this break, let's talk a little bit about year 2 and how that's going, because you've had a great expansion when we get back on This Week in Startups. Hey, everybody, let me tell you a little bit about Citrix GoToMeeting. I don't even have to read the ad copy because I use it every day, all day long. I was using it today, actually looking at a startup, and it was great because we had HD faces, so everybody was crystal clear, and we were sharing a desktop, and they were doing searches, and we were chatting at the same time, and if I wanted to, I could have recorded it. I didn't, but it is very helpful to record it. Sometimes we do record it with permission. We ask people like, hey, can we record this because we're doing a demo for the launch festival, and we want to share it with Jason so he can watch it when he's on a plane or at his leisure, as it were. And GoToMeeting has so many great features, including scheduling and launching meetings on the fly. These are two critical features. We build a schedule for myself and for the rest of the launch team so that when we're meeting with companies for the launch festival or the Scale conference or to be on This Week in Startups, we can do all of that super easily, and the schedule is right there for everybody to see. So people can join in and see the schedule, or we can just send a link to somebody and say, hey, get in this chat room right now and do an ad hoc one. That works great. And all the meetings start on time, which is my pet peeve. When you're trying to get everybody on a free service, the bandwidth is free, so therefore it's going to bork and the quality goes down. You never have a quality issue with GoToMeeting. It makes you look professional when you use a professional paid service with dedicated bandwidth and software that doesn't crash. I cannot tell you how many times people put me on free conference calls or free screen sharing and it breaks and you look so unprofessional. And those precious minutes you have with a client or an investor or a board member or a potential employee or team member, those minutes get wasted. And it looks terrible when things start 10, 20 minutes late. I can tell you, people who are important have what's called a hard stop. And so I get on calls. I'm like, I have a hard stop at 11 and it's 10:30 and we're at 10:42 and we still can't get your screen shared. Please use GoToMeeting because we'll all be on and working perfectly in seconds. It just works. It's awesome. Go to GoToMeeting, click the try it free button and use the promo code TWiST. Use the promo code TWiST at gotomeeting.com. Try it free. I guarantee you, meeting is believing. You will love this product. And, a lot of times, just traveling across town, with gridlock in Los Angeles and New York and here in San Francisco or going to the Valley, it can be a waste of time. I mean, sometimes you want to be in person, sure. But I find that a lot of times these meetings are 15-minute meetings, 30-minute meetings, and people are multitasking. They're listening in. It's better to not go an hour across town or half an hour across town each way, and the expense of the Ubers alone, the expense of just taking Uber or a car service could be greater than the cost of a year on GoToMeeting. So anyway, listen, I love the product. This isn't even a commercial. It's a personal endorsement. I love the product. I've been using it for years. It's awesome. Thank you at Citrix, at GoToMeeting on your Twitter handle, please. Okay, let's get back to the program. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to This Week in Startups. It's me, Jason Calacanis, your host. You can follow me on Twitter at Jason and the show at TWiST Startups. Today, I'm speaking with Max Ventilla. I always get that. Is that Italian? Ventilla?
I think I've been mispronouncing it for years. So if you,
but I got it right, right?
I
Ventilla.
pronounce it as Ventilla. Yeah,
Ventilla.
That's how they.
It's Italian.
That's how they talk to me. I'm Hungarian. But I think it's. I mean, it's certainly Latin in its original roots.
Ventilla. And he is the CEO and founder of AltSchool, which is an alternative school, I guess, is how the name came up, which is reimagining education. They're in their second year. They have 4 locations, 150 students, 4 campuses, and you're servicing people from, what do they call that, development kindergarten or?
Transitional kindergarten.
Transitional kindergarten.
4 years and 9 months.
And then all the way up to?
Through middle school.
Through middle school, which is what, 7th and 8th grade typically?
6th, 7th, and 8th grade typically.
All right. So when we left our conversation, the teachers will not even ask you to fix stuff, or you have to basically pull it out of them what they don't like because they're so used to not being listened to and having resources, I take it?
Yeah, well, yeah. And it's not just for teachers. I mean, for parents as well.
Yeah.
We have to re-educate parents to complain. We really do.
Yeah.
And, my daughter goes to a preschool in the city that I am phenomenally impressed with. I absolutely adore it. It's instrumental in me even thinking about going into education and what approach I would follow. But I don't give them critical feedback outside of the kind of once a year cycle that they ask for it.
Well, because you don't want to be a pain in the ass. You don't want to
it's not helpful to them to tell them hey, the schedule could be changed in this way or that way. The only thing they're going to do with it is basically file it away.
Because they don't have resources.
They don't have resources, and they also are in a mode where they kind of race through the school year in some sense. They're exhausted at the end of it. They have a recuperation period, and then they think about ways in which they can be better for next year.
Yeah.
And kind of what we bring to the table by not necessarily knowing education at an expert level, being engineers and designers and product leaders is a way to think about a service that's very different than how education was traditionally experienced. And one that can flex up, that can flex down. I mean, we have a 90-minute drop-off window for parents. We essentially have year-round school. If you want to have Mandarin in a classroom that otherwise wouldn't have Mandarin, we can accommodate that. We have a platform that allows us in a non-virtual setting to be incredibly flexible about what each child is getting, what that class is getting versus another, upper elementary or lower elementary class, even in the same location. And what that lets us do is kind of constantly iterate and tweak from both a structural standpoint of like what's happening in this classroom and from a product standpoint in terms of what tools we make available so that 4-person teaching team can actually deliver 20 different learning trajectories to the 20 kids in the class, or can offer the level of complexity where you can really pick and choose what makes the most sense for your family right now.
And so having so many items on the menu, to me sounds like, well, wait a second, how many things can we be an expert at, right? So a lot of times when people pick schools, they say, well, I want a Montessori, I want a Reggio, I want a traditional. Can you actually deliver, and how would that even be possible to deliver so many different types of cuisine in this metaphor from one kitchen? Because you have so many resources now as a venture-backed startup, but when you start to hit scale, will you be able to plug in so many different options for parents? Or do you have to say, you know what, in order to scale, we need to make this experience a little more, less customizable?
So from the education sector perspective, let me take the example of Montessori.
Yeah.
Montessori is a fairly consistent approach to how you educate kids in terms of, at a high level, the kind of pedagogy theory, and at a low level in terms of mechanically what you're doing throughout the days. It exists in rural implementations, in urban implementations, in preschool implementations.
That was the big Google thing,
high school implementations.
Like Google's thing.
Larry and Sergey were out of Montessori. And we could do a lot worse for AltSchool than thinking of ourselves as updated Montessori that has been created in the last 100 years and that really uses technology not to replace relationship-driven, real-world, teacher-curated learning, but to superpower it.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, you have to create an approach to education that not only is updated, but that allows different kids to get what they really need, even while they pursue the same high-level objectives. So one of the things that's interesting about AltSchool is what kids learn is going to be very similar across AltSchool classrooms, and even comparing between AltSchool classrooms and totally traditional classrooms.
Right. They're going to learn to write. They're going to learn to spell. They're going to learn to do math.
They're going to learn to negotiate conflict. They're going to learn to do all the things that you would expect a broad education in the 21st century needs to deliver to make kids who are going to be happy and successful. But how they're going to do it is going to vary tremendously. And it's going to vary tremendously for one kid in the class versus another kid in the same classroom. It's going to vary tremendously between a classroom in one part of the city and another part of the city. And it's going to vary tremendously between looking at kind of San Francisco schools and the way they generally will operate and the values of families that will be in them versus Texas schools or New York schools or ultimately French schools or German schools.
Interesting. So you're thinking about this as a platform that will go to many different places. What do you think ultimately the price point on something like this will be? Because when we think about scale, like a service like Uber, which hits scale, or Facebook, some things are not cheap, and then other things, with efficiencies, you can make UberX cheap, but UberX, you don't get to pick your car, let's say, or the driver. So, there are some compromises there. What's the compromise to all this? Is it just going to be fabulously expensive? Is this going to be a premium product? How do you look at that?
So I think we look at it almost reverse, not as like what costs, given a certain cost point, what quality are you going to get? And more as at any cost point, we want to be as good as you could be at that cost point. And we believe that not now, but within a matter of years, at a cost point that's comparable to public school, we will offer something that is a really compelling.
What does public
option.
School cost? I don't even know.
In the city, it's about kind of $10,000 to $13,000 per student when you talk about all-in costs.
Yeah.
Again, that's for kind of the school year, which is a pretty small fraction when it's
the number of days is like 150 days or something.
So,
yeah.
And with furlough and things like that, it's getting shorter and shorter. So
maybe that nets up to 18,000 or something if they were
if it was a year-round school, that kind of thing. But
$500 a week or something, $100 a day.
We are really looking for a cost point, for the base alt school education that is, well below $15,000 within the next few years.
And that would be half of private school. And how is that possible? Is it just that the traditional schools you're going up against have so much overhead and so much overstaffing, and then nobody gets fired? I mean, you're kind of going up against the laggard of all laggards. I mean, the public school system in New York, which I was a product of for most of my life, it's pretty much known as being horrific. Like, nobody ever gets fired. They have so many teachers getting paid to just go to a classroom, and not do anything. Like, literally, they get paid to go to a building, and they can't fire anybody. They've got this massive amount of administration. They have this massive amount of what do they call your 401k when it's guaranteed? Pensions. Thank you. They have this crazy pension programs. It's just you're up against. It's such an unfair fight you versus them. They're so saddled with these cost structures and this infrastructure. I mean, it is possible to do it for that number, isn't it?
So I would separate out the kind of the personnel versus the kind of structural approach. So there's no reason why a kind of alt school approach can't work with union teachers who have passions, and in fact, we think comparably there could be enormous value add in kind of rethinking for that audience how you could provide school that would be better for teachers and better for kids. Ultimately, what AltSchool is a way to run a distributed network of classrooms that are independent from each other, but all benefit from not just the content that's created and the data that's created, but also the community that exists across a broad number of locations. One of the things that was most surprising to me when I first started kind of digging into education was this fact that we have diseconomies of scale. I mean, I'm actually kind of surprised that the New York public school system isn't better than everything else.
It's so big.
Because it's so big.
You should be able to get discounts.
You'd be able to create something which might look very different from the bespoke kind of one-off independent schools. But wow, for scale, you can't beat it. And it has all these advantages. So I'm actually fascinated to think about how you take an alt school model and eventually, I mean, it'll be a long time before we wouldn't be wasting the New York public schools' time to ask them to consider how we might work together. But eventually you think about how you take many of those same people, many of those same facilities, many of those same students, and you kind of layer on some new approaches, you layer on some fantastically enabling technologies, and you deliver education in a very different way at scale. And doing things that get better the more people use them, and doing things that get better over time, keeping pace with the incredibly accelerating change in the world around us, that's kind of, I'd say, most core to what we try and achieve at AltSchool, which is very different than I think what the existing model, which is about 100-some years old, has really been able to achieve.
And when you think about it, they're using the same math book and they're buying X number of copies of it.
It's costing them more per copy than if they bought less of them. I mean, that kind of stuff.
It's a
that's
racket.
The stuff that I don't really understand.
That's crazy because you could have the best math teacher could actually make one document of the lesson plan, and you could have one of your developers do the UX and UI perfectly and make it super delightful and redistribute it with a video like Khan Academy is doing, or use the Khan Academy video, who knows, across all the schools. And it would cost the cost of that one teacher and that one UX designer editing and improving it. All right, when we get back, let's talk about what your biggest win so far has been and where you feel like you've come up short and it's incredibly frustrating for you at the AltSchool when we get back on This Week in Startups. Yes, Scott Walker. I don't even have to look down right now. Scott Walker is a great attorney. Scott Walker has helped countless startups, from This Week in Startups, the Launch Festival, and Silicon Valley, get through some of the most complicated, annoying legal issues. Things like formation, M&A, raising money, terms of service, all this stuff, employment agreements. He does it, and his team does it so well because they're a boutique law firm that specializes in working only with startups. I haven't looked down at the copy because I don't need to. I can tell you firsthand that every founder I've sent to Scott Walker has gotten treated so well by the Walker Corporate Law Group. They do an amazing job, and they give fixed fees, which to me is unbelievably generous and supportive, because it's really scary when you only have $50,000 or $250,000 in funding to think about, oh my God, a $10,000, $20,000, $5,000 legal bill month after month. It gets really scary for founders because it's not predictable, and you're on the phone with your attorney and you're worried. Oh my God, is my bill going crazy? Well, you know what? Scott Walker is a true innovator and entrepreneur himself. And he is one of the first attorneys I've ever seen in my life, and he's been doing this for years, to give fixed fees to founders. He's really changing the game, and he's a great guy. Scott at Walker Corporate Law, Scott at Walker Corporate Law, Scott at Walker Corporate Law. Just email him right now. Tell him Uncle Jason sent you. 415-979-9998. 415-979-9998. 415-979-9998. He's just a great attorney. He's got all great lawyers working with him, 10 to 20 years experience in the field, no junior associates getting on the job training. Everybody thank Scott Ed Walker on Twitter. And if you retweet him and CC me or just thank him, I will follow you and I will retweet you. Thanks, Scott Ed Walker. Just a great guy. Scott at Walker Corporate Law. All right, let's get back to this amazing program. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to This Week in Startups. I'm here today with Max Ventilla. He's the founder of the AltSchool, which you can find, altschool.com. Only in San Francisco and 4 campuses. So, big wins and most frustrating surprise so far for you and the teachers and, trying to scale education.
So the biggest win by far is that this is possible. We started the company in June of last year. 2 months later, we had a school open. The next school year, we have 10 classrooms open. We're opening more. We have, essentially limitless demand when you look at the neighborhoods that we're expanding to in terms of people wanting something that is less expensive, more adaptive, higher quality, and modernized, has been kind of created for this century and taking advantage of what we can uniquely do this century.
So the fact that you were able to even just get this off the ground is shocking to you.
And this team,
it's pretty funny.
I basically went to the 20 best people that I'd worked with in my whole career and tried to get them to leave amazing jobs, and they did. And just finding something that couples, per your earlier question, everything that is wonderful about a mission-driven organization with everything that's wonderful about a 21st century, Silicon Valley startup that kicks butt in the technology space. Yeah. I mean, that marriage has been incredible to be part of. And getting to do something that has this long-term aspiration and has backing from unbelievable investors to actually go do that.
You guys raised what, $30 million or something crazy?
We raised about $33 million so far.
That's incredible.
And then we raised another $11 million in venture debt.
Oh, you did venture debt too?
Yeah, so almost $50 million.
Wow. That's incredible, dude. So who's the lead investor? Who's the biggest?
So Founders Fund led the round.
That's Peter Thiel's venture fund.
Brian Singerman is on our board.
Okay, great.
And then Andreessen Horowitz.
Okay.
Lars Dahlgaard is the partner from Andreessen. And then John Doerr personally was kind of the next largest investor.
Wow. So you guys have a war chest. No school has $40 million to build infrastructure.
Well, lots of schools have way more than that.
Oh, right. They don't deploy it properly.
No, they deploy it absolutely profitably for what they're set up to do. We spend the majority of it on R&D, on engineers building things.
Yeah. So let's talk about those things. Give me a couple things that you've done that have gotten wins, just like product wins.
Yeah.
There's got to be product wins already. Give me some product wins.
So, we have something called a learner portrait.
Which
is something totally behind the scenes, which kind of, starting in the admissions process, we begin to understand each student and their family in terms of how that student learns, what they're interested in, what's the progress they've achieved across different academic and non-academic objectives, and then just their basic traits. Do they have siblings? Where are they coming from? That kind of stuff. And being able to create a structure around that understanding that everyone in the AltSchool universe can add to. And we're not just talking about educators and people kind of who are AltSchool employees. We're talking about the parents of that family. We're talking about this child.
So this
themselves.
is like your health record in a way, but it's your knowledge record.
It's your living,
learning
breathing
record.
kind of learning portrait.
Wow.
And
so it's not your report card and it's not your file in like the negative punitive sense that's going in your file. This is like who I am, and these are the characteristics I have as a learner.
That's right. And you can always,
what's around me.
And you can always create a view of this in terms of like something that you would hand to a high school that you're applying to, or that an incoming teacher would be able to use to really kind of understand what makes this student.
So what are some of the unique fields on that report, as it were?
So we have about a dozen different learning styles that, again, it's not as if a student is only this learning style or only that learning style, but kind of how they fit across those buckets versus other students.
So learning styles like
are you an experiential learner? Are you a social learner? Do you need to do things multiple times before you get it? Or are you the opposite? Are you someone who needs to just jump right in, do it, and then leave it behind for a while before you go back to it?
Now, I grew up in Brooklyn, and where in the learning pattern is like the teacher like shames you and embarrasses you in front of class and tells you you're an idiot? Because that was my learning. That's the approach they took with me.
That's not so much there.
They're like, Calacanis, you're a fucking, literally, I teacher telling me like in the public school system, like, you're an idiot, like, just stop talking and like just let the other class learn. And I'm
that's
like,
not really there.
That's not on the form.
I mean, not to rattle too much. We think that there's a fantastic number of things that an AltSchool education can be. There are very few things that it can't be. One of the things that it can't be is it cannot literally strip out all technology.
Right.
The vast majority of learning happens off screen.
Of course,
We're talking, but we measure it. We look at what percentage of learning is happening off screen, and it's the vast majority in an AltSchool classroom. Right. But it's certainly not 100%.
Right.
Screens are used, the internet is used, technology is used in a fundamentally enabling way. The other thing it's not abusive.
Right.
We do not bully. We do not allow teachers to bully. That's not the way that we think that you instill grit and confidence. That is also a way you can get some of those things. That's not how we do it.
Right.
And so...
Notice, let me tell you something. It can build grit if it doesn't break you first.
Yeah. And we actually...
And I saw kids get broken in the public school system in Brooklyn and in Catholic school system. Actually, in Catholic school, it was worse.
And this is a general thing that we pursue in kind of each student's personalized plan, where we prioritize what objectives they're focusing on over this coming period and what milestones they're pursuing within those objectives, like to be able to count to 20 in terms of an objective of improving your overall numeracy. And then also how for this student, given their learning style, we're actually going to determine whether or not they met that goal. So for a child who, is not particularly verbally strong, you should determine whether they can count to 20, not by asking them to say the word 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe by reordering things in sequence. Right. They can demonstrate it in their own way, even if they're pursuing exactly the same objective that some other student who's verbal is pursuing. That way of mapping from portrait to plan to ultimately that playlist of activities that the student is working
portrait,
on this
plan,
week.
Playlist.
Right.
Is that your 3 Ps? Is that actually how you use
That's the kind of core learning cycle.
Yeah. Where'd you get that from? Is that something the educators came up with, or is it based on some science? Or
it's been based on the learning from the first year of doing it in practice. And so it's been absolutely a kind of iterative, evolving group effort to think about what are the key pillars of this AltSchool learning cycle, and then how do we build technologies to enable that teaching team to personalize through that cycle at a level that's like totally impossible to do sustainably and scalably without technology.
How do you update the portrait, as it were? So your kid's been in the school for 6 months, and we're all looking at the portrait. Is there somebody who comes in and says, hey, objectively, let me audit the portrait, and you have like some specialist who goes through all 150 students you have and says, let me just do portrait maintenance? Is there like somebody who does just that?
The truth is that you are always updating it at different levels. So that is something that happens. You have people that are kind of focusing on many different classrooms, not one. And part of what they do is at a high level kind of look at kids' portraits on a less frequent basis, and provide a sounding board to those classroom teachers who may have, a partial perspective. At the other end of the extreme, every time a student finishes a playlist item and you have maybe, let's say, 25 per week for each child, it doesn't just get done. With whatever the deliverable was, so for example, the example of their topic sentence, it gets sent to someone who's on their teaching team, and then that teacher evaluates whether or not they kind of met the objective. And if they did, then it gets inline assessed, and that becomes part of that student's portrait. So, you're
so
constantly
it's almost
adapting
like
this.
World of Warcraft, like you've gamified to a certain extent in a good way, and created a process by which you can almost checklist this stuff and, confirm, hey, this person is counting at a reasonable level. They are getting this speech pattern right, and they are able to do phonetics correctly, so nobody gets left behind. Because in the public school system, they don't have any tool like that. And you're here in your second year, which if you just put the first year as like like a bogey, like that's just your like planning year. So if this is really truly your first year, in your first year, you're already going to be processing the kids' learning in their playlists and at a much higher level than any public school right? I mean, none of them are doing anything like that.
It's not just that any school. I mean, you see so many amazing examples of individual classrooms and individual schools personalizing education, mapping from what all kids should know to what this kid needs to really thrive. If you dig deep, they are always achieving that feat by having way above average people working unsustainably hard. And those things are not scalable, right? And so achieving it, doing as well as the best classrooms and the best teachers and the best schools and the best principals do, personalizing education while still rigorously developing kids so that they can be happy and successful in the world that they're going to enter on adulthood. We see how to do that, but we're productizing it. How do you actually do it reliably over and over again, year in and year out, where you have a kindergartner and things are great for a few years, and now they have a third grade teacher who doesn't really work for them, and it goes off the rails.
Right.
That's not an acceptable outcome for us.
Right.
Where unless you have this constant perfect fit with the teacher and the student, things go off the rails. It needs to work well, no matter what. When there are great teachers and great teaching moments, it not only needs to benefit that student, it needs to be amplified. Right. And we outside of the education sector take for granted that our motivation comes from being able to impact, many, many, many people. All the startups that hear this thing and think differently. And that's part of your motivation why you come. Teachers have been forced to say, well, you only get to impact the people you literally see
tone it down.
Right here.
Right
just
here. Stay
that's
focused.
Where you can impact.
Put your blinders on.
And so we're trying to create a platform again that elevates the baseline so that it's great without requiring constant great teaching moments from great teachers all the time, while still allowing, when we have great teachers and great teaching moments, to impact not just that student, but orders
that
of magnitude more.
best practice could then be syndicated.
That's right.
Throughout the organization.
For some other similar student pursuing a similar objective in a similar situation, they can benefit from what worked for that kid.
I'm sure there are some things that would, I don't know what you'd call them, but home runs or whatever, that every student would just love to do this project. And some teacher figures out like, wow, we did a project about, something I'm trying to think of
with ratios and bicycle gears.
Fine. So they figure out bicycle gears and ratios, and it's like, wow, every student loved this because they got to actually build the bike and figure it out.
Yeah. So let me give a great one that I just learned, which was, kids that grow up in households that have closed captioning on their TV learn how to read 2 years earlier. They're 2 years further by the time that they're 7 years old.
Wow, that's
than kids
fascinating.
that don't have closed captioning on their TVs. Just that. So it's like,
okay, wait a second.
You want to watch TV?
Not that the parents have turned it on, just that
it's on. It happens to be on. It's like
happens to be on.
You have a parent who happens to be deaf, or
you have me who I can't follow Game of Thrones.
Yeah, exactly.
So I put it on because I can't remember. You ever watch the show Game of Thrones? It's like everybody's name is there's too many characters.
And what they found out is that actually. It takes you about 2 days of enduring all the things that stink initially about closed captioning, like all the words come on at once.
They misspell them sometimes. They're blocking the screen.
It takes about 2 days until you get used to it and you can't live without it, and you get a much richer experience. And for kids, they learn how to read faster. So we're literally thinking through like, well, every time kids are staring at a screen in any alt school setting, why isn't there closed captioning on? Yeah. That's the kind of best practice that you can roll out everywhere. Yes. And again, there will be some negative side. You'll have to learn. Maybe it won't work in these settings or that. You'll have to iterate.
And sometimes, like if it's live television, they misspell stuff all the time. They get it wrong because they're trying to keep up in real time. And sometimes people say gibberish. But
that's the kind of best practice that we are suited to be able to incorporate far earlier. And then to learn from when it doesn't work, how we can do it better.
So as a parent, I have a 4-year-old, 9 months, and just full disclosure, she's in the school. So we have some iPad apps that we love that have been transformative for her in terms of writing numbers with her finger and stuff like that and counting. That it's mind-blowing to see your daughter, and you have a 3.5-year-old, I think, and I'm sure she has an iPad. There are some of these apps that I watch her working on it, and I'm like, oh my God, she's counting to 100 now. And before she had this app, she was not. And in a week or two period, she is addicted to this Firefly app where you just press the fireflies and go up a tree or whatever, and she just counts the fireflies to 100. Simplest app ever made. My daughter can count to 100. These other kids can't even count to 10, 20. When you look at those amazing apps that are being made outside the building, do you think about incorporating them into the building? And are there some that have just been extraordinary and transformative? Or do you think we'll study those and we'll make our alt school version of them? How do you look at that?
No, definitely the former. So we really think of ourselves as building the operating system to enable a 21st century education. And if you look at Android or Microsoft Windows or kind of any operating system out there, it actually gets the majority of its functionality from third parties. Right?
Sure.
They're doing some big, difficult things, and then
but they don't make their graphics card.
They don't make their graphics card.
Yeah, it's Carl Zeiss
Apple
lens.
incorporates natural language processing to do Siri from someone else.
Yeah, nuance, whatever.
And so we think of ourselves in the same way as ultimately providing functionality that comes primarily from third parties.
What about Khan Academy as one of those third parties? Because that seems tremendous.
We love it. And again, not
so you don't feel bad that it wasn't built here.
No, not at all. I mean, quite the opposite.
That's been a big resistance. Is like that. Sal, he's been on the program many times, but Sal Khan is like, he's one teacher, like all students don't like him, but it seems like he does such a great job.
But again, all students don't like him. You don't need to use him for all students.
Exactly.
We think that.
But there's such resistance to that. And I think, why do you think there's so much resistance from teachers to like just saying, hey, we'll use the Khan Academy syllabus or whatever?
Well, I think that without the rest of the OS, it is difficult to just take something piecemeal.
Got it.
It is difficult to know, is it working? It is difficult to assess in a rigorous way. It's difficult to justify, why this, why not that, whether you're talking
politics,
to your administrators
debate,
or the teacher. And you asked earlier about, like how on earth we're getting 3,000 teacher applications in our first year. And this idea that a lot of it has to do with presenting discretion. I think the biggest difference between alt school and pretty much anyone that I've encountered in the education space is we are a bottom-up organization. We are not top-down. And teachers come to alt school and they kind of think that we're BSing them.
Right.
We kind of think that if they come, there's going to be this principle. Anna Queenie, who's our VP of school operations, basically runs our schools. Kind of like, oh, well, Anna's actually the principal. They just don't call her that. They're all Web 2.0-y about it. And then they get there and they're like, no, Anna does not approve your lesson plan. She's not like your manager's manager. She's there to make this
She's not the headmistress, principal,
run.
Draconian, do it my way.
No, coming from a place like Google, you learn this kind of search, not sort approach to how you do things. And the idea that—
What does that mean, search, not sort?
Search means we're going to let everyone come up with a website, You are going to basically say what your website is about. You're going to just do your thing.
Yeah.
And then we're going to decide what websites people should see when they're looking for certain type of information. It's not a free-for-all.
Yeah.
There are standards. There's a meritocracy.
Yeah.
Very different than sort.
Right.
Yahoo started out with literally a human-curated directory where the way that you found, bird food website was you went to the bird food section of the directory and some human had decided like that was good enough to put there. And in some settings, human curation is absolutely the way to go. But at some point, you can't scale doing that. And so what we're doing is creating an approach to opening and operating real physical brick and mortar classrooms with career educators.
Right. And that reduces risk. So if you pick a career educator, because that would be the question. It's like, hey, if you're going to open these classrooms and you're going to take be very freewheeling like this, well, what if you get a bad teacher? And then it's like, hey, my daughter's in that class, your daughter's in that class. Like, we're victims now of like, oh my God, we're experimenting. But you're saying there's a benchmark of like educators that you will let into the program.
Well, so first off, we have the teachers that you would hope to get in the schools that you have a hard time getting into.
Right.
And
with the 3,000 applications for X number of spots.
And especially because we have a teaching team that all together is working on the experience for your child. So it's not like you have this one teacher in the room.
Everything in one basket.
Everything in one basket. And in general, like we are trying things out, but we're figuring out whether that's working that day. For that student. At the end of every week, we're sending the playlist home with all of the reflections, including from the student, to the parents. They're seeing everything that's happening. So it's not to say that it's always, the best thing that we're doing. But when things are suboptimal, they're suboptimal for the hour or the day, not for the year, not for the decade. And so that's how you get better. It's by becoming much, much faster in your iteration, much, much tighter in your feedback loops. Yeah. And then what that lets you do is try more things out. Because the reason why schools haven't changed in 100 years, it's not because they don't want to. It's not because they don't care about evolution or improvement. It's because they're not set up to be resilient to when changes go off the rails. Right. And so they have to be incredibly conservative about what things they try out. And then the other reason they're not is because they literally don't invest in their future performance. They spend less than 1 cent of every dollar on R&D. You're never going to do anything but maintain. Right?
Hey, what do you think of this? Like, there are things like Share My Lesson. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but like this. Now you have a global resource. I'm just looking at the website right now, sharemylesson.com, by teachers for teachers. Very cool site where teachers share lesson plans. 290,000 of them available now. It's amazing. It's almost like there is, when you talk about the search not sort, there is this like meritocracy of lesson plans going on out there that there really is no excuse for not finding a great one anymore, to having a great curriculum. There is a competition going on the web right now as we speak, because people want to sell their lesson plans. So do you guys buy lesson plans from here, or do your teachers use it, or you wouldn't even know anything?
We buy a ton of them.
And
a lot of what we do is give teachers a discretionary budget so that, to the tune of $100 per student per year, they're able to buy all the stuff that they
So they got $3,000 or something, $1,500, $3,000.
Yeah, for this kind of stuff. And again, if it's working, then
you increase the budget.
But it gives them enough that they don't need to go and get approval to try this or do that. And I smiled a little when you started talking about like why are teachers creating these bespoke lesson plans? Like the teaching profession to a large part is 1/4 like artisanal lesson planner and 3/4 disciplinarian for kids that don't want to be there.
Yeah. And parents who are just engaged.
And
those kids,
neither of those roles is that constructive. You cannot remove the artisanal lesson planning from the equation, because that's kind of all the creative outlet that a lot of teachers have left.
Right.
And so what you need to do
is their joy.
Yeah, you need to change what is their primary creative task. And for us, it's being the guide for those kids. It's not about preparing the lesson and then kind of packing it into that brain. Right. It's about being a partner that's able to help select from all the different things that kid could be learning. And the internet in particular changes the relationship that humans and especially kids have with information and with acquiring knowledge. You don't need to be intermediated in the same way as you did 50 years ago, even with a library card.
Yeah, the idea of like memorizing the presidents in order, or even doing math in your head. I mean, listen, it's worth doing, but calculators are available. Like there was a certain point in time when they didn't want you to have calculators. When we were going to school in the 80s and 90s, it was like that transitional period. Can you have a calculator or not was a big controversy. Now I think that's kind of answered. You can have a calculator. Yeah,
I mean, one of the things that pushed us early on to start something radically new in the education space is this notion that if she doesn't already exist today, she will soon. A child who, by elementary school, has gotten so accustomed to the internet and technology that asking her to take a test without the internet is like asking a child to take a test without their arms or their eyes. And right now, we don't have a school model that is equipped to deal with that child. And at first, there's going to be one of her, and then 10, and then 100, and then 10% of kids, and then 50% of kids, and then 100% of kids will be described by being so not dependent, being so integrated with what is possible with technology
like
today.
We are. I mean, if we're at dinner and we're having a conversation about great films or something like that, and I can't remember the name of the Kurosawa film, I can pull it up. It's not against the rules.
No, Gmail is my externalized memory, and I need it.
And hey, our conversation about Kurosawa films can be that much richer if we both pull up our phones and we both learn something or pull out the name of the film we forgot and the plot point. We don't have to memorize all this stuff.
But there are
sad for our childhoods.
Yeah, but so here's an interesting thing. I think at the same time that things like the internet cause you to say you need to memorize less, they also cause you to say you need to memorize more.
Right.
Because there's an increasing premium on creativity. And I believe that creativity, being able to make synthetic leaps and saying, I'm going to create a sculpture that looks like this. I'm going to create a company that does that.
Right.
Requires you to have just a certain amount of stuff sloshing around in your brain.
Sure.
If I send you out in a field with a bunch of like random materials and I say build a sculpture, the best way to do that is not to go on Google Images and search for sculpture until you copy something. It's to have had like years ago that thing that you saw, that thing that you read, that thing that you heard. So I think that there is still an enormous premium for learning things, for acquiring facts, for acquiring experiences, really with no direct purpose in mind. That are going to be the useful building blocks for those creative thoughts down the line.
Like reading a book or like seeing a great film or going to a play.
Going to a play.
Yeah, like, visiting an aquarium or something.
We're in danger of saying like, you know what? You never need to experience anything in advance in any kind of depth because in the moment, you'll know exactly what you
want to
need.
have more experiences.
Consume that.
But all that time, think about our childhood and how much time we wasted memorizing stuff. And when you look back on it, what were they actually doing in making us memorize stuff? I think it was babysitting.
Yeah, or it was very indirectly like expanding your ability to remember, which could have been done directly. I mean, there are techniques that are amazingly effective.
You could just do a memory palace.
Exactly, for remembering
Dancing
things.
with Einstein.
And they never taught you that at all.
No.
And this is
I had to read that book, Dancing with Einstein.
So it was written by one of my classmates at Yale.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So
if anybody, that's my Audible pick of the week, even though I'm not in an ad break right now. But oh my God, Dancing with Einstein. Explain that book.
It's great. Well, so it's someone who started reporting on these people who do like incredible feats of memory where they compete in the memory Olympics and they recite like Homer's Iliad in the way that they used to do. And it all basically comes down to a technique where you map
mnemonics,
information onto a physical setting because it turns out human beings are extraordinarily good at remembering things spatially.
Right.
We're not as good remembering things without spatial cues. And a lot of that was because for eons, if you didn't remember where you were going and you got lost, that was it.
You're dead.
You know, and so that was like one of the chief evolutionary.
Remember where the water is.
Remember where the water is. Remember where the cave is. Remember where the cave is.
What a great book, though.
And you highlight one of the things that when we talk about kind of curriculum and mapping from what all kids should learn to what this particular kid needs and how we're going to assess that. Schools often approach exactly backwards what they're teaching versus the underlying kind of cognitive skills and character skills they're developing. So they say, if I teach you to read critically, to estimate, to write a research paper, then you will learn grit. You will expand your working memory. You will, gain phonetic awareness. I mean, it's almost exactly opposite. We tend to take an approach which says, let's target those skills and those kind of cognitive attributes and character attributes directly. Right. So let's have an objective that you're pursuing, which is to negotiate conflict. Right. And let's have items on your playlist that help you improve your ability to negotiate conflict. And let's assume that a lot of those kind of skills around being able to estimate or being able to research or being able to present a thought coherently, they'll come up in the context of projects that you really care about, going deep on things that you as a student are passionate about. That's what I loved about
the Reggio approach. We did Reggio school for the first 2 years of my daughter's life. And what a wonderful approach to, hey, the child's interested in orcas. Let's keep going down that, orca trail, as it were, and go see an orca and, learn about their habitat and learn about what they eat and whatever, make a paper mache one or whatever it is, design one in a CAD,
So if I had to put kind of my aha moment with respect to AltSchool, at one point in time, I was sitting at TED listening to Sakata Mitra talk about school in the cloud about 18 months ago. Yeah. And he was talking about this kind of play-based emergent learning continuing throughout a kid's childhood education. And I said, why would you stop with this Reggio approach when a kid turns 5 years old? Right. Especially when the world that we have increasingly looks like a world that is emergent and play-based and people going deep on their interests and changing. And so
dynamic, competitive,
why would you spend 10, 15 years in this
you want to crush people's soul because you want to crush their soul.
Well, historically, you want to turn them into Prussian soldiers who would follow orders. That's literally the root of this model.
Oh, is it really?
But one thing I point out is in Reggio, they talk about the orcas and the individual. It's actually emergent at the level of the class more often than not, because it's not really feasible for every kid carrying on their own independent learning trajectories. Right. And I don't think it is without technology. It's one of the chief challenges that we have. And that doesn't mean that a huge fraction of the learning isn't in small groups or large groups or whole classroom learning. Many of the playlist activities bring kids together to work together on something that they're mutually interested in. But there is the room for very significant, long arc, personal explorations based on an individual student's interests. I think taking the Reggio example kind of further than you can without technology.
Well, if you think about it, and this is going to sound kind of silly, but if you think about your Facebook feed or your Twitter feed, right? Twitter feed's a better example. You've curated a couple of people you like, news sources you like, funny accounts, fake accounts, whatever, and you grow and your feed is organic. You take things out, you put things in. But in your school, there is no equivalent of building your feed, as it were. No. And nobody's recording it. So I don't remember. Well, you remember in kindergarten what inspired you? Was it a robot? Was it a lightsaber, laser? Was it a dog? Who knows? We just all forget. But if you have that profile and you can put into the profile, hey, this person's daughter loved orcas and this person's loved insects. Hey, now we're in year 2 or 3 and we're doing multiplication or we're doing division or whatever. Hey, maybe we should reintroduce the insects. We know that for the last 2 or 3 years, there are. So let's get millipedes and centipedes and start doing hard, long math around that or something.
So you're if you carry that thought forward, you get to kind of one of the main things we're trying to think about now for middle school education, which is how do you culminate an AltSchool education in allowing a student to go deep on something that they're personally passionate about and demonstrate expertise at a level that we would consider impressive, not just for a child, we would consider impressive. How do you get 14-year-olds who are architecting and building 4-story buildings or starting nonprofits and getting
We're starting companies building apps, and we're starting to see that.
Yeah, teenagers used to be expected to do fully adult. They were literally adults for most of human history. Some of the best works of art, some of the greatest works of policy were done by people in their teenage years. It's a relatively recent phenomenon that we think until you're almost in your 30s. Yeah. You're not really capable of contributing anything.
Yeah, we live too long. So then there's no sense of urgency to rush you into adulthood. This idea of preserving your childhood, until you're 25 years old and living with your parents. It's ridiculous.
Right. And at the same time,
it's absurd.
There is a challenge, which is if kids are going to be allowed to really go deep on something that they're passionate about as early as 12, 13, 14 for like multi-year periods. You don't want them to just kind of go deep on a random thing. And so we need to force ourselves as a school system to be rigorous about what we're exposing kids to over the prior years.
Right.
And taking that learning that the child cares about insects when they're 5 and they care about zebras when they're 10 and the Serengeti when they're 12 and saying, let's up level.
Yeah.
And let's try and see something that this child is generally turned on around so that we can really put something in front of them that is going to hook them, but is also going to kind of fill in all the things that we expect them to be learning during these years. And the opposite of that is it's just shocking the degree to which people randomly pursue their major and professions. I mean, if you think back, like I was a physics major in college because my best friend in high school was really good at physics. That's why I was a physics major.
Yeah.
And like it worked out great for me. There was some points along the way where I said,
you were sitting next to a guy and that's what happened.
Sense? But like we can do better. And it's one of the things where that's why good schools do so much better than bad schools, is because in good schools, you have more possibility to get lucky, to be next to that great physics guy who inspires you,
have a mentor,
great teacher.
Yeah.
And in the bad schools, you don't even get that first rung of the ladder to pursue. Yeah. But across good and bad, all of those settings, we should be bringing kids up the curve of their own interests and getting them to where by the time they're a teenager, they're actually able to show a potential high school or college or eventually employer, like this is what makes me tick. This is why I'm special. And I have that basic foundation of skills. Like I can add 2 numbers together and I can make a point coherently, but like I'm switched on and look at the amazing things I can do in this thing that I'm passionate about.
5 years into this, your daughter's been through 5 years. What do you hope she's like?
So I want her to know herself and I want her to know what she needs to be happy and successful and to start to be able to get that from the world in a way that makes the world a better place. And I don't know what's coming in the 2030s when she's going to be an adult, but I'm willing to hang my hat on the fact that if she can do that, she has a massively increased chance of being happy and successful in the 2030s. And I think that to do that, you need to be exercising that agency muscle super early.
What do you mean by that, the agency muscle?
I think you need to personalize education, not because it maximizes the satisfaction that a student feels and minimizes the frustration they feel given a certain challenge that they really should best, but also so that they understand that they're the ones in the driver's seat, that this is their life. I mean, I'm astonished at how far I went in my own academic career before it sunk in that like this was for me. This wasn't for my mom. This wasn't for, my principal. Like, this was for me. It was literally like,
this is my choice?
20s.
Yeah.
Right?
And this is my life?
Yeah. So, and
I can do what I want?
Like that should start at, I almost feel like that should start at birth.
Yeah.
Like that should start at birth. And again,
what a beautiful gift
personalization and agency are not about letting kids do whatever they want. Like a 4-year-old is absolutely their own worst enemy in all kinds of
more
ways,
ice cream.
Right?
Yeah.
And so is a 10-year-old and a 15, like, you gradually take the training wheels off.
Yeah.
But that fundamental activity of getting to know yourself, getting to know what you need to be happy and successful in life and being able to get it.
Yeah.
And in a way that leaves the world better off, where you're not just like a clever thief. I think that is kind of at the top of what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, it's a great vision. And I think, it's the staff is exceptional. I mean, wow, you've really done a great job there. And then, the master plan is just so brilliant. I think it's going to be an amazing, couple of years for you. I think this year is going to be amazing as you figure out like actually this, the plans for everybody and their profile. And, I can take out my phone and sort of see what my daughter did. And, that's all being done on Trello, or what are you going to do there? So far,
it is. One of the things that we've done is we've thought about.
Good, I'm an investor in Trello.
We've thought about our product in terms of this operating system cycle where we have multiple kind of transformative releases over the course of the year. At some point, we will come off Trello, but it's been amazing to be able to build on to something that's so well done and so kind of multi-purpose, and is an example, again, of how the majority of your functionality doesn't need to come from you.
Yeah.
You can kind of piece together functionality from different places. You can wrap functionality. You can create something that at the very least you learn a tremendous amount from before you go and you spend the engineering man years required to go build the pieces of that functionality that you should really be doing in-house.
All right, listen, Max, we could talk for hours, and we did. We're at an hour now, or well over an hour now, I should say, and we're going to have you back in a year, and we're going to figure out exactly. So 1 year from now, we're going to book you again. We're going to recap the entire year in education, continued success. And you can follow Max on, what's your Twitter handle? You got a Twitter handle or no?
Ventilla.
Ventilla, there you go.
Ventilla.
Ventilla. And AltSchool is altschool.com. And do you have a Twitter handle for that too?
So far, it's been AltSchool SF. I think we've actually gotten AltSchool recently. Twitter was very accommodating, and we went through the kind of Byzantine process to get a handle that wasn't being used. I
mean, there's so much demand here, and has a corporation like a Twitter, I would assume they have, come to you and said, can you put this into our building so we can offer it as a service?
We are working on what we call kind of a community builder program where certain companies that are really engaged in their local communities will either within their own headquarters or in space adjacent help us get a facility up and running. And some of those...
That means subsidizing, right? Yeah.
Subsidizing it. Yeah. If at the very least, I mean, you asked about our challenge earlier. It's been trying to get facilities up and running and kind of navigating what's been a very hard kind of permitting process. And
the red tape of space, yeah.
Yeah, and it's just we exist in the physical world, and
you're the Uber of education.
That's been the hardest thing. Yeah. I mean, in our case, we're not so directly kind of displacing any particular entity, but yeah, I mean, we're aiming to bring a new model, and it's. So, for example, there are many restrictions against where you can put an elementary school, but those restrictions are based off of assuming there are, 500 kids that are in that elementary school and 500 sets of parents, dropping their kids off and picking them up at the same time. Those don't hold for us. We have 50 kid schools and we have a 90-minute drop-off window, and a 3-hour pickup window. So it's kind of starting to work with the city and figuring out like how we can best be regulated, which should serve the city's interests. I mean, it's not about special treatment. It's about a new model and figuring out how the city gets all the things they want, and we get a predictability that lets us, not waste money and not waste time and actually open schools where they're needed.
Getting permitted and all that stuff. And so for now, where do you think you'll be next year?
We aim to be well above 500 students in the Bay Area.
Next year?
Next year.
So you want to triple?
In September. That's right, at least.
Wow.
And we're looking especially in South Bay and East Bay in addition to San Francisco for where we want to be.
Yeah, of course. And I'm sure now, is it becoming a bit of a competition between those locales to draw you there? I know San Francisco proper, the city, is like a rough place to do stuff. It's probably the tightest regulations for good reason.
I wouldn't say that. I would say that we are enormously open to specific municipalities that want to work with us. To date, we're going through kind of other processes to decide like what are the locations, not just in the Bay Area. We're also looking to expand to 2 out of the 3, LA, New York, and Denver, if not in the next year, soon thereafter.
Tripling every year, is it going to be too fast? Do you have a quality issue or what?
So it's always while improving quality. So we have, a separate quality objective, which is pretty rigorously defined and constantly kind of monitored and tracked. And
what is that? Parent satisfaction?
That is one of the 5 components of it.
So parents rate, you do an NPS
implicitly and explicitly. So we look at retention and churn and how many people they're referring and siblings and things like that, as well as just explicitly like what are they saying in terms of how satisfied.
Right. I mean, if they're referring people and they're putting their siblings in and they're staying, that's the great implicit.
It's a good implier of satisfaction.
If they explicitly say, I'm pissed off, but I'm staying, that's sort of like...
That's probably still okay satisfaction.
Yeah, it's like,
better than the opposite.
I'm still going to come and get my steak here, but I don't like the fact that I waited 20 minutes, but I'm going to get the steak.
They might just be a critical person.
That could be that too. All right. Listen, an amazing hour plus with Max Ventilla. continued success at the AltSchool. I really think it's awesome that you're taking this challenge on. And it really, I mean, I think for people who are, I'm just going to go on a little tirade here, mini tirade, but all these people are so goddamn critical about the internet, and especially internet people in San Francisco, with the buses and the protests and being on Kevin Rose's stoop and all this nonsense. Listen, I know that it sucks that the rent's too damn high. That happens in every developing city. It happened in New York. I watched it. But then cool people moved to Brooklyn. It wasn't the end of the world. But the people who are in the technology industry, this technology industry that I've been in for 25 years, are great people doing great things for humanity and for advancing our society. And this is one of the best examples I can think of. Hand Up, AltSchool, even Uber helping transportation. There's so much good stuff going on. And to focus on just the fact that the rent's going up, I mean, it's an issue in every major metropolis, you know, like, I mean, you see this. You've been in San Francisco a long time. You're just blaming the Google bus for the world's problems. The rent is like ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. And then taking it out on individuals. I mean, I understand the Ellis Act thing is a little bit weird. I'll be honest. Like that I didn't even know about when I moved out here. But that you can kick everybody out of a building that quickly, it's a little bit. That probably should be tweaked a little bit, I think. Like, I was like, wow, you can just kick everybody out of a building like within X amount of time. I was like, why don't you just give everybody a year? Wouldn't that be reasonable?
Yeah.
When I'm mayor, I will just, everybody gets a year. If you buy a building, you get like a year or $100,000. That's it. Actually, that's how they should do it. You should get at least a year if somebody buys the building, or they should have to pay you.
Well, whatever you want to get, whatever you need to give up your year. I mean, that's.
Or, well, they could either negotiate, or they should just actually have a set thing where they could give you double your rent for that year. So then you're getting paid, you know, like by all means, take me out of my place for double the rent for a year.
Yeah.
That gives you a year free. Mm-hmm. Maybe trip. I don't know. Whatever. This town's a little, I've only been here for a month. It's a really big culture shock as a New Yorker who lived in LA for 10 years, living in San Francisco and seeing all this craziness. All right. Thanks again, WeWork, and thanks to the team here. Emmy Award-winning producer Jackie and Jacob on the ones and twos, crushing it at TWI Startups, at Jason, at launch, and we'll see you all at LaunchScale, which is going to be an amazing event. October, you can go to launchscale.net. And then the Launch Festival, 10,000 people coming in March. Yes, that's right, 3 times the size of TechCrunch Disrupt. Not that it's a competition and that they had our keynotes from last year. At this year's, it's not a competition that it costs $3,000. And I give 9,000 tickets for free to you, my loyal audience, to come to my event. It's not a competition in any way, especially since we've already won and crushed them. Okay, we'll see you all next time on This Week in Startups.
Okay.